Welcome to a special broadcast on Wisconsin's food manufacturing and processing industry. We have 4 industry leaders, and I'm going to ask each of them to identify themselves. Mark, would you go first, please?
My name is Mark Arthwaite. I'm the Executive Director for the Wisconsin Brewers Guild.
I'm Nick George, President of the Midwest Food Products Association.
My name is John Holyfield. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Wisconsin Dairy Business Association.
I'm John Umhafer. I'm Executive Director of the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association.
We're also joined by 2 leaders of Competitive Wisconsin, a group with a vision of how sectors of Wisconsin's economy can grow and prosper. Please.
Hi, I'm Jim Wood. I am Chairman of Wood Communications Group, and I serve as Strategic Counsel to Competitive Wisconsin and to the BeBoldIII Council.
And I am Mark O'Connell, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Counties Association, and also Vice President of Competitive Wisconsin.
Jim, before we get into some of these specifics, can you give us an overview of how important food processing and manufacturing is to Wisconsin's economy?
Food manufacturing is a critical and essential component of the Wisconsin economy. The cluster employs more than 64,000 people in Wisconsin and generates more than $8 billion for the state's gross domestic product, ranking it 10th in the nation. The cluster has demonstrated strong employment growth over the past decade, and comparative employment numbers suggest that the cluster is sustainable because it holds significant prominence in the nation's food production capacity. Wisconsin, for example, is the top dairy products employer in the nation, employing even more people than California, New York, and Ohio. It ranks 4th in the nation in employing people in the fruit and vegetable preserving specialty foods category, behind only California, Washington, and Oregon. It ranks 12th in animal slaughtering and processing and 8th in other food manufacturing. Equally important, Wisconsin's food manufacturers are major consumers of Wisconsin's agricultural produce and as such play a critical role in supporting and complementing rural economies across the state. So that's the numbers and the pictures and the charts of what the industry looks like here in the state of Wisconsin. But I think it would make some sense if you guys wouldn't mind, just take a couple of minutes and talk about who your members are and where they're located around the state, and give us some kind of a human feel. You're dealing with these people all the time. John?
So I represent the Dairy Business Association. We have several hundred farmer members. They're spread throughout the state pretty evenly, with probably the highest concentrations in south central, southwest, and in northeastern Wisconsin. We also have a membership for corporate sponsors, these are folks who support our farmers, and those again spread all throughout the state, including even our biggest cities. So really dairy touches almost every area of the state.
And our association has been around since 1905. We started out as the Wisconsin Canners Association. Now our membership is broader than just vegetable processors, but we are dominated by them. And like all processors, they go where the raw product is. So my membership is predominantly central Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, and over on the western side of the state also.
The association's been around for 125 years this year. Our members are multi-generation families. They are cooperatives. There are some corporate members, and there's about 125 places in Wisconsin where we make cheese. In addition, there is yogurt makers, there's ice cream makers, and what's often not known is that there are as many, about 200 places in Wisconsin where we make cheese vats, we make dairy ingredients. So all told, there's about 500 members in our association who are making dairy products for people in the United States and around the world.
So Wisconsin Brewers Guild was founded in 1997. It's the 4th longest tenured craft brewers trade association in the United States. It would be surprising to a lot of people if they heard that about 35, 40 years ago there were only 7 producing breweries in the state of Wisconsin. We now have approximately 165 and probably another 15 that are coming online within the next year. So we've seen quite a resurgence in brewing activity in the state of Wisconsin. We're a membership of around 100 breweries and an additional 35 to 40 allied trade organizations as well.
Jim, could you give us a little background on what we're about to see and why we have all these experts around the table, please?
You bet, Steve. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate your being here today. Appreciate everybody's being here today. So as we've said, we've gone through this long process of research and discussion and strategizing about how to address the issues that were identified by food manufacturers in a variety of different circumstances. And we're talking today about the third of those issues. We've talked about regulatory, we've talked about workforce issues, talking today about infrastructure and public awareness. And we've linked the two because that's the way it came across. In other words, we found a linkage. We heard from people that there are issues related to roads. We've heard that there are issues related to water. We've heard that there are issues related to educational infrastructure and to workforce infrastructure. And what we're discovering as we've carried on this conversation is that we believe there's a link between public awareness of how we make our products and how we do our products and what kinds of pieces of the infrastructure we need to be able to access, and that's impacting the industry again. So that's the topic for today, and once again, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you and Mark.
Mark, you and I did interviews on that, and from watching the Capitol as we do, the shorthand for infrastructure is highways in the context of this current budget. Now, but infrastructure, as you're aware, is a lot more than that. So your impressions when we talked to business leaders about the big I issue?
You're right, Steve. When people think of infrastructure, they think highways, but it is much bigger than that. Whether it's transportation, whether it's broadband, whether it's water, whether it's human talent, having a good, solid, well-maintained, functioning at a high level infrastructure is no guarantee of economic success. But the lack of a solid, well-maintained, highly functional infrastructure is pretty much a guarantee we cannot succeed. And that's one of the challenges we face in the food creation industry. Let's go to the video and see what some of our colleagues had to say.
So, gentlemen, let me ask you, what are the challenges we are facing in the food industry as it relates to infrastructure?
Well, we have a road system. We have a great road system, frankly, because of our dairy industry. Now we have to maintain that road system. And that's going to take money and time and expertise. So that's a challenge. The food industry is dependent on water. And we come from a great state. There's plenty of water here. So now we have to just figure out ways to make sure we conserve it, keep it clean, and use it wisely. So I'll start with those two.
You know, on the roads, you know, I would agree with Nick. We had a good system, road system, fundamental in our rural communities. But you know, a couple things have happened. One is I don't think we have been reinvesting in that rural road structure. And the other thing is we're demanding more and more. We're putting weights on there as our agriculture has evolved, heavier weights and stuff. I live on a dead-end road, and it was at one time a dirt road, and then they put gravel on it and seal coated it. So the base was never built to withstand the kinds of weights that we're putting on it today. So we need to reinvest in it because again, agriculture is evolving, and I think our infrastructure needs to evolve with it.
And I think that's a great point. The food processing industry, like a lot of other industries, timber and other agriculture industries, rely on those roads. They rely on that first and last mile to get their products to and from. And as the Senator said, I think it's been a prolonged period of time where we have not reinvested in those rural and first and last mile roads. And then that coincides with, it is an entire system because a lot of these folks, products are going far beyond. And eventually after you get past that first and last mile, it does have to move over the interstate system as well. And like all the other states in this country, our interstates were built in the 50s and 60s. They were built to last 50 years, and time's up. They need to be rebuilt. And so we're facing that issue at the same time we're facing this need to reinvest in our rural roads, and it's a challenge on both ends.
Well, it is really that part of the issue, Senator, what you touched upon. We've had a food industry and many other industries that have taken off. Technology, just better processes, mechanization, they've all improved, and industries have gotten better. But in infrastructure, we've kind of played catch up and kind of put Band-Aids on things. You can't put the kind of machinery we have today on a gravel road of 1950 and expect it to hold up. So maybe infrastructure hasn't kept pace. Is that broadband in a whole host of areas? Ken?
It is, but the big thing is when you come to transportation, if you wonder why this country advances further and faster than anybody else, it's because of transportation. If you take China, you take India, you take any place else in the world, they would catch us if it was that they could transport and get the food out of there. They could catch right up. But if you don't have the transportation, our forefathers put this here. It's our responsibility to keep it up and build it back. It was done 50 years ago, as you said, and we need to address it. And if it does take tax dollars, and that's what it's going to take, there's nothing we can do about it. It's got to be done.
Well, the food industry, while it touches every part of our state, urban and rural, much of it really does rely on rural transportation. And that's the area where we don't have as many people, so it's not perhaps it's not as concentrated. It's a little bit easier to address an issue within an urban environment when you have a lot of constituency. Here, the constituency, it really should be all of us because we're all consuming food, but it's not quite, I guess, as clear. Is that fair to say?
I would agree. It's somewhat of an urban-rural issue. I think our funding, our emphasis has been for a couple of decades probably, has been funding a lot of projects in urban areas of the state. When you look at in Milwaukee area, the Southeast Wisconsin freeway system, for example, needed improvements. There's no question.
Population density dictated that.
Yeah, but I raised my hand here, though, going, what about us? And there hasn't been enough resources to take care of all of the needs of the state of Wisconsin, and I think in a lot of cases, rural Wisconsin has been shortchanged over the last couple of decades.
It can't be an either or, and in a lot of the cases, and the senator's talked about his district specifically facing some of those challenges, there was an audit done by the Legislative Audit Bureau where the senator's district had the roads were in the toughest condition in our state, but it also showed that our state had the worst road conditions in the Midwest by a significant margin. So it's an entire system. These products need to move over the first part, but they also need to move over the entire system, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. So we need, the other thing that the food processing industry needs, that other manufacturers need, that agriculture people need, is some certainty. And they need to know some schedule for when these things are going to get done, and that's what we've been lacking really in recent years.
So as Ken pointed out earlier, I mean, many years ago, we decided we were going to expand tremendously Highway 53 to connect northern Wisconsin to the rest of the state. It's about building more infrastructure, isn't it? It's not just about the infrastructure we have, but it's about building more. I mean, the food industry is everywhere in this state. So whether you're in Florence County or rural Richland County or Kenosha, there's food going on all around you. So, and we need to expand, it seems to me, the infrastructure, whether it be broadband, we haven't even touched on that yet, or whether it's water, or whether it's hard surface transportation, or for that matter, with today's, I guess, new millennium knowledge technology-based economy, more people having more money and consuming different types of products, it's even air as we transport the best cheeses in the world over to other countries, isn't it?
Yeah, and looking at it, and we talk about broadband, for example, dairy farms are becoming more technologically versed, and in rural America, rural Wisconsin, we have huge problems when it comes to broadband technology. We can't get the type of internet into a lot of dairy farms and a lot of rural roads. The infrastructure just isn't in there yet, and a lot of that comes from the challenges we've had on the companies not wanting to bring that broadband in there, put the infrastructure in, spend the dollars because there's not a lot of people there to buy that product. So we look for an incentivization process to help get infrastructure, help get broadband up into rural America, and the same applies for utilities. And we can talk about getting electricity and the amount of electricity that these type of businesses need, these type of farms need in order to produce these products. That's all a challenge we've been facing in rural America, rural Wisconsin especially. The further north we go, the harder it has been for us. In our clientele base, we really see that. You get up in rural Wisconsin and they can't get internet at their farms. Their cell phones have better internet than they're able to get into their barns. That's a challenge when we're looking to produce a sustainable, safe product, and we need to be connected to the cloud in order to provide the data and analytics necessary up into the cloud to analyze this in real time, to process in order to produce this product efficiently.
Well, Craig, where do we, can you tell us what the status of our rural road system is? Where are we in the quality scale?
Well, it's hard to compare local roads with other states. On our state highway system, there's a comparison metric, which is the International Roughness Index.
Well, first of all, it's hard to compare rural Wisconsin with other states.
Right.
For example, Minnesota, because we've got a small town every 20 miles.
Right.
And in Minnesota, that isn't the case. There are large expanses of very little population. So we're a very spread out state when it comes to population. But
Right.
And that's why we have the food industry we have, because there's a lot of agriculture going on, around every bend. So we can't really compare to other states, but go ahead.
But with our state highway system, we can. There's a standardized metric called the International Roughness Index. And on that, most recently, U.S. News & World Report had Wisconsin ranked 49th out of the 50 states on those. When you get to our rural roads, again, the comparison is tougher, but I think most people that live here realize that that's where, a lot of them are in the roughest shape. Some of your members, the county highway folks, did a survey of their folks on what schedule they're on to be able to replace. They might be able to do a mile a year, a mile and a half a year. And based upon the current funding that they're getting for roads that are engineered to last about 30 to 40 years, the average replacement cycle they're on right now is 200 years. So, when you look at that, and then you look at the number of bridges that are beginning to be posted and weight restricted, I don't know what the comparison is with other states, but it's a tough situation on the rural roads.
Is that what you see as well?
Something's got to get taken care of here, because what's happening is these local townships, and I don't blame them, they're basically leaning on us farms and saying, here, you guys are using the roads, so you need to fund this thing. So we've been asked to dig into our pocket and start paying for improvements to roads that are used by everyone. Of course, certain roads are used by us a lot, but we're not the only ones that own them, right? So there's got to be a way to get money into the local townships to rebuild these roads.
The concept of infrastructure is very vague, and it means different things to every different person. So I'm really curious, each of you industry leaders, what does infrastructure mean to you, John? And then I'll come around to Nick and Mark.
Well, I think the first thing that pops into our minds are our roads, right? But beyond that, we're really looking at the place where we do business and the different component pieces of it. So that includes our natural resources, things like water, in our circumstances at least, working lands that are still in agricultural production. We're losing those at a pretty accelerated rate each and every year. Infrastructure also includes human talent, so going back to our workforce issues, but beyond that also our capacity to do research and so all the folks that support our industries at the UW and in other educational institutions throughout the state, those are all part of sort of this broader definition of infrastructure, the place where we do business.
Boy, that's a broad definition. Nick?
That was good, and mine is just as broad. It's roads, of course, but water. We're blessed with water. We have an ample supply of water, and that has helped us greatly. Land is a big deal, and we have some of the best growing land in the nation up in the Central Sands. So that's a big part of the infrastructure. And then I'm glad you mentioned research. That's a big deal in our industry. The university system it works with the food industry for years. It always has. And it's one of the reasons that I think that we're such a leader in the food industry is for all the work and the partnership that we've done with the University of Wisconsin.
Thank you. Mark?
I have to echo much of what we've already heard. Roads obviously are an issue. Our products need to get to market, and our products go to very urban and very rural areas. Land is an issue, certainly for the raw materials, although not a great deal of malting barley is produced in Wisconsin anymore. We're starting to see resurgence in hop growing. In the 1850s, Wisconsin was the world's largest hop producer. But
1850s?
1850s.
Okay,
it's been a long time, so it'll take us a while to get to that level. But the raw materials that we use in our breweries, I referenced earlier the importance of local. To be able to use local ingredients in our beers is very important. And then certainly water. Like I said before, 90 to 95% of our product is water, so high quality water and access to it is vital to our needs.
Now, in terms of the cheesemaking industry, what does infrastructure mean? I mean, your trucks need roads, but it's a much bigger package. So infrastructure to the cheese industry means, please.
Well, you took the best one. It is roads, it is transportation. Like the dairy farms, these are rural businesses, and they are on that third tier of road in Wisconsin that needs to get to the second tier of road and onto the highways. So that is a big part of what we need for infrastructure in the state. We also need access to water, and we need to make sure that that remains. We need to solve the big problem of water in the state, but it's a big part of food processing in this state. So water, roads.
Most of your members on the secondary roads, the county roads?
Absolutely. These are rural businesses, most of them.
So we're not talking about the last mile concept. You go way beyond the last mile.
Sometimes, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on what had been an impasse in the Capitol over funding of highways? I mean,
Well, what has to be remembered in that discussion is the rural road issue. There's a bigger question of funding the big interchanges around Milwaukee, but even more important for our members is not forgetting those rural roads and keeping those in shape for decades to come. And that, again, is something that impacts, I think, the vegetable processors and the farmers.
John, in some cases, you either have the resource or you don't. That's water. We happen to have it. But really, it's the quality of the resource. So roads, water, humans, is the quality of those resources holding back the bottom line of our food creation industry?
Definitely that human resource, that workforce issue is there. Quality of water remains, and our use of water is not as intense perhaps as some of the other industries. And then the roads, again, crumbling, I hear from my members, crumbling around the state. They've asked for solutions to our impasse that involve doing what we have to do with taxing people to use the roads in this state.
So it's not just because of the shape that it's in. It's costing you in front end alignments, in trucks every 5 years instead of 7 years, every 5 years instead of 7 years. It's costing you in terms of actual bottom line dollars, which is taking dollars away from your companies.
All right, it's a very practical issue. It is things about keeping your trucks on the road, keeping the fleet moving. Yes, it's that simple. It's that basic. It's that practical.
John, I had a question about the overall cheese industry. Is it at a crossroads? I mean, just won major international awards, but do you see how big the cheese industry could get if some of these problems, if some of these issues are resolved? And what's the other side if these issues aren't resolved? Are we going to see a shrinking cheese industry? So give us the best and worst case scenario out a few years, please.
Yeah, you take it back to regulation. That could definitely be an impediment to Wisconsin. We are proudly in Wisconsin and among the regulatory community often leading the charge on some of the things that make our permits so difficult to get and so difficult to meet, which does make other states attractive. Workforce, honestly, in addition to all the solutions we can come up with to get more people in our factories, people are buying robots to put in their factories because in the interim, they've got to get the product moving. And as for infrastructure, that too becomes an issue, I think, in comparison with other states that are making the spend. So I think in each of those cases, we've got to take action in Wisconsin. I do not see it stopping Wisconsin from growing at this time, but I do see it entering the discussion, I think, in the boardrooms of where do we go next or where do we invest next. I don't think you're going to see Wisconsin make less cheese in the next 10 years because of these issues. But we don't like to think 10 years in the cheese industry. We've been around a long time, and we're going to be around for another 100 years or more. So that's the kind of thinking we have to have in this state, is the long term.
Mark just talked about quality of these infrastructure pieces. And I guess I would put on the table a discussion about public understanding, support, awareness is also a piece of the infrastructure. It impacts what happens to you in local government, whether or not you get support to do something with rural roads, et cetera. What's the quality of that piece? I mean, we've talked about it on other issues, but is that a piece that we need to be concerned about upping the quality?
Yes, everyone knows Wisconsin makes cheese, but it's a part of the fabric of the state, but it needs to be part of the business fabric of the state. I hate to say, I don't want to say we're not taken seriously enough, but maybe we need to be talking about how we impact the state. And there are numbers out there on how we impact the state with dollars and with jobs and opportunities. But let's broadcast that a little farther. It's not just that we wear cheese on our heads, it's that we've got great opportunities for careers in this state. So we've got to keep the industry strong.
But isn't your industry on a roll from a PR standpoint? We're number one in cheese production, and doesn't that help
Right,
in terms of the high profile of your industry?
It does, and I'm not crying that we are in a position of the industry is tanking. On the opposite is true. We are making more cheese now than ever before. We're making more varieties. We're winning more awards. We're in a good position, but we're here because we're looking at long-term issues about infrastructure, who's going to come work at our factories, and is state government at the regulatory level holding us back? And the answer to those is yes. So there's opportunity for even better growth, but I'm not going to say we're not growing. We're doing great.
Nick, I want to come back to this very controversial bill in the legislature a few months ago. The Central Sands water, your vegetable and your potato growers, they need that water and a lot of it. Yet, that debate was over environmentalists who saying running the risk of groundwater, drawing down our groundwater supplies. So that illustrated the debate of water as a key part, not only for what your members need, but of the whole concept of infrastructure, right?
Correct.
So talk to me about what we learned as a state from this very recent bill that passed and the governor signed into law.
Well, that was as you said, it was a controversial bill, and it came from basically lake owners who saw the level of their lakes drop and claimed that it was because of agriculture. And so the agriculture industry, looked at the issue and researched it with a number of other people, universities and whatnot. And the job there was to try to convince them that it was more than just agriculture. Yes, there's a vast pool of water underneath the Central Sands. And yes, agriculture does drain it, but it is easily resupplied because it's a sandy area. The lakes, yes, they went down, but those were seepage lakes. There was no water running in, no water running out. And so, but you have to, it's hard to convince, a property owner that, that agriculture or whoever is drawing down their lake, they don't really care. They want it done. They want water in their lake, and you can understand that. So that got to be a very controversial issue. Bottom line is, though, is that the water that's in the Central Sands area is deep and it's vast, and the people who use it, namely the growers and processors, use it sparingly. It's very expensive to access water. It's very expensive to move it around and then to use it. So water conservation is at the top of every manufacturer's list, every grower's list, and every processor's.
John, here's what strikes me. Nick's members use water. Your members, your dairy producers, their runoff, Kewaunee County, there's always a debate over whether your dairy producers threaten groundwater. So you see water as part of a different perspective, don't you, your members?
Well, from our perspective, it's about groundwater, surface water, quantity and quality for both. So you're right, I think there's multiple facets here. And it really, to us, it means that we have to work together in partnership with our neighbors.
And if I could jump in, this conversation captures issues we've talked about in the other two programs in terms of regulatory and workforce, but it's critical because when we talk about public awareness, it's not just a matter of being aware of us as canners or as packagers or as dairy or cheese makers or whatever. It is about, there's a process going on here, okay? It is a matter of helping the public to understand some of those scientific facts, et cetera. A piece of the infrastructure is American politics, okay? And we have a heritage of being out of sync with the technology and the science in terms of our regulatory apparatus or infrastructure, if you will. So that moves forward. We have new data now on the Central Sands stuff. We have new data related to the dairy industry, et cetera. I'm not sure that's being incorporated. I'm not sure that's being understood. And so part of the challenge is politics tends to move very quickly. You got an issue, you've got a group of constituents, whether they're lake owners or whatever. The challenge we confront in this day and age is we need a strong economic environment as much as we need a strong environment, natural environment. We have to protect both. And the danger is that when the political equation tends to put that out of balance, we're not working in the best interest of the people of the state of Wisconsin. And so this is really, I think this is a challenge, again, not just for the food manufacturing industry, but for every economic endeavor, because we all impact in different kinds of ways. So this concept of public awareness is not just a matter of us producing brochures and posters and all the rest of it. It is a matter of having to say to the public, you need to understand this stuff, okay? I mean, it's not enough to just get out there and put a bumper sticker on your car or wave, this affects whether or not your tax base is gonna stay solid. This, as well as what's happening to your groundwater levels, etc. So this is a fascinating and interesting time and challenge.
Well, but what about the resources of local governments like your counties? I don't have to tell you how resistant taxpayers are to tax increases. Tax increases and diminishing tax values reduce the ability of local governments, not just counties, but state governments, to meet some of these infrastructure needs. Mark, talk about that pinch.
It's a very good point, Steve. As I've said often, if we're going to be successful as a state, we need a very vibrant, strong private sector. And the food creation sector in our private sector is critically important. So when it comes to infrastructure, the very existence of a piece of the infrastructure is important. Water, either we have it or we do not. We happen to have it, and we got to maintain it and make sure it's clean. But then there's the issue of, let's say, maybe the best example, transportation. What quality level of transportation is necessary for us to have a strong, vibrant, growing food creation sector in our private sector? It's an important question, because if it is affecting the bottom line of our food creation companies, that puts our state at a disadvantage, which puts further pressure on local units of government and individual taxpayers, because there's a certain level of infrastructure or government that is necessary to keep our society working. So I guess the question for you gentlemen is, speak to me about the quality of our current level of infrastructure. And I guess transportation, the highway system, is the most obvious example.
Wisconsin, I think, is known for having good highways. But recently, there's been questions about that. For our guys, it's very important that local roads be well maintained because of all the raw product that comes out of the rural areas. And so that's important. Bridges are a big factor because we have big, heavy machinery that needs to get around. And when it's time for that machinery to move during the harvest or during planting, it's got to move. And so maintaining quality is a big deal. And I think Wisconsin has done a good job, but clearly we need to invest more.
Are state and local governments less willing, or do they have less capacity to expend the resources and the taxes to protect the infrastructure that is so critical to your industries? What's your thought, Mark?
Well, there are a lot of breweries that actually are setting up shop in areas that have been long neglected. Some of the infrastructure.
That's called economic development, isn't
It's
it?
very much in the strike zone of economic development. So the infrastructure related to providing the access to those neglected areas for redevelopment is critical, and municipalities and local governments have been very, very receptive in helping to encourage that kind of economic development. But yeah, it's that what goes along with that, unfortunately, you will have long neglected roads that lead to those areas and other infrastructure that just needs a facelift. But it's a partnership that in the end, I think, pays dividends for everybody.
Do your members see schools as part of our infrastructure in Wisconsin? Or do they just see the next highway and a water issue? Do they see schools as part of our infrastructure, Nick?
Oh, I think so.
Do you?
Definitely. Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of our plants are located in rural communities, and it's a community. And if you go to these communities and you ask the schools who some of their biggest supporters are, it's businesses. Businesses contribute heavily to public schools, and so I think it's a very important part.
It seems like one of the overlooked elements of our infrastructure is the soft infrastructure. When we have 1,000 locations in this state related to the food creation industry, and many of them without broadband, high-speed internet, that's problematic. I mean, again, while having broadband is no guarantee of economic success, not having it puts you at a significant disadvantage, and in some cases precludes you from economic success.
Well,
so this conversation is
And
critically
quality
important.
of life ties into that, because if you want young people to relocate into a rural or a rural community, they better have access to internet.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, try to get a 20-something to come to your area to work, start a family, create opportunities, and take advantage of opportunities without internet or broadband.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Are you members saying we've made progress in broadband, extending it to some of the rural areas that are so critical to your members, John?
I would say not really.
Really?
But I would acknowledge that it's a significant need, and not just for our employees, but for basic business operations in our situation. I mean, we have people who they have no option. We have farmers who rely on their cell phone versus their computer, just simply because they have better ability to communicate or to send something online through that than they would with anything they could get for a computer.
Part of our infrastructure debate involves emergency services. Are we being able to maintain our police, fire, paramedic, and other emergency services in some of the areas where your members live?
In general, I think yes.
Yes, okay.
That will always need to be a priority, of course, but
So that's been protected.
I think so.
Agree, Nick?
I think in general, yes.
Agree, John?
I would.
Okay.
Again, I want to draw it back to this idea that of partnership and problem solving. We live in an era, an age of change, and everything that all of us, Mark's fond of pointing out how old we all are, and he's right, but everything, except for John here probably, but
You millennial, you.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But everything that we knew and how we approach problems, et cetera, has changed, okay? It just moves faster, it's harder, it's sharper. Because we've had the aging of the population, we've got people living longer, that produces different kinds of demands in terms of healthcare, a lot of which touches the rural. You talk about roads in rural, it's not just a matter of getting agricultural equipment from one place to another, it's a matter of getting people from one place to a place where they can get health care or they can get some other kind of service. So these are critical issues. The dollars available are shrinking, okay? And so we're all here because we want to figure out how to grow the economy so that we can begin to replenish those dollars to get where we want to go. And I guess the bottom line for me on all of this is it seems to me that there is a need to think strategically about how we're going to do things. We need to stop saying, I need this for the roads, and somebody else says, I need this for the schools, and somebody else says, I need this for the industry, whatever else it may be. The question is, how do we put those pieces together? And it may be a matter of saying, this is what we can do, need to do over the next 2 years. This is what we can do, need to do over the next 5 years or 10 years. I mean, we need to come together understanding that there is no such thing as your end of the boat is sinking, okay? There is this need to think about how do we get all ships rising at this point in time.
Well, if I can sum it up, I mean, what I think we heard is that infrastructure is critically important to the success of the food creation industry. And it's not just one part of infrastructure, it's all of it. It's water, it's transportation, it's broadband, it's human talent, it's all of it. And in the BeBold recommendations from Competitive Wisconsin, the recommendation is we need to highlight that. We need to make sure our citizens are aware and know that this infrastructure is important to these 1,000 points of food creation contact we have all over in every corner of the state of Wisconsin. Critical recommendation.
Well, and maybe a rubber meets the road question. What's at stake for your members if we don't get these infrastructure issues resolved? Mark?
Making sure we have access to market. It's as simple as that. If you can't get your products to market on, via the infrastructure or the raw materials that you need to produce your product, that's limiting your access to market for sure.
Number of breweries then peak. Maybe we lose some if we don't get it right.
I'll do everything I can to make sure we don't.
Okay. You have an interesting perspective on water. We all love your product.
That's right.
We really do. Oh, Nick, what's at stake?
Competitiveness. There are other sections of the country that do the same thing we do. And so it's all about being able to compete with them. And it's also about being able to export. We export a lot of food products out of this state. So being able to get them in a costly manner to the ports, to the rail stations, etc., it's a big deal.
John.
And Nick's right. I mean, the question is, do we stay where we are, or do we look for opportunities elsewhere? And it is a cycle, to Jim's point, because you can't have a strong business climate without good infrastructure, but you also can't have good infrastructure without a strong business climate. So when we need to be here to help fund rural infrastructure, we have people out there in rural communities where the largest part of their tax base is coming from the same people who need to use those resources. So we can't look at it as we're adversaries here fighting over who's going to pay for this. You need us to pay for it. We need it to be able to pay you for it. We need to start working together on how we make those partnerships. So it might involve a change of mindset on the part of some, but it's definitely necessary that we have that conversation.
Jim, when I read the Competitive Wisconsin report to get ready for this, one comment struck me. I'm going to ask you to kind of land on it. We're here because of the farmer. You remember that?
Yes.
So it begins with that, and from that grows all of these different. So go ahead, give us your wrap-up thoughts, please.
Yeah. Well, again, it is for me. It is always about this concept of strategic partners and problem solving. And the comment was made at the very first Deloitte sounding board session, and we were talking about food production, food processing, food manufacturing. And an executive from one of the major companies in the state said, well, let's not forget that we're here because the farmers are here, and then the farmers are here because the water's here and the soil's here.
And that executive then said, if the farmer, go ahead.
If the farmers can't access the water, if they can't access the soil, they will leave and we will leave. And I think, this state has its entire history has been agricultural, if you will. We've always had a strong relationship with our natural resources. Okay? That's part of our history. Our industry grew out of that set of relationships and then expanded beyond that. We're at a point in time where our interests now, I believe, coincide. Okay? The taxpayers' interests are essentially the same as the farmers. We need to make sure that farmer prospers in this state. And we need to do that, figure out how to do that without damaging the environment or the resources, because we want the resources to last. Okay? But we need to have that conversation, as John was saying, as opposed to not having that conversation and arguing with each other. We need to say, how do we get from here to there? What does that look like? And in that conversation, we have to ask ourselves, is there new science that helps us? Is there new technology that helps us? Is there new public education applications that help us get there? We need to be more of a family again. Back in the day, in the 1850s, for example, the community was the community. I mean, you knew maybe 100 people if you were lucky, and you didn't know anybody who was 25 miles away. And that meant you understood everybody's business. You were all farming, you were all doing this, that, and the other thing. And so when you said, I got to do this in order to be able to grow the crops, everybody nodded their head. We don't have that level of community anymore. And to some extent, we need to work at getting it again, whether it's around food processing or business services or whatever. Without a strong economy, as Mark is fond of saying, all the rest of it goes away. We can't support the schools, we can't support the roads, we can't support it. Okay, so we are in this together at the risk of going on and on and on here. So I would say thank you again to Wisconsin. Thank you, Steve Walter, for bearing with us as we talked about all of this.
Well, just quickly, thanks to our panelists, thanks to our industry leaders. Next steps. What is Competitive Wisconsin going to do with this? Where can someone watching this access the report? Wrap it up that way, please.
Well, obviously, we're hoping that you folks will do your magic, and
We
that
will.
we'll see these programs showing on Wisconsin Eye. They will also be posted on the Competitive Wisconsin and Be Bold sites, and when you're watching this, you'll see those tags on the line. We are encouraging, obviously, the folks who've been a part of this exercise with us to post it on their sites and get it to their members. We want to do briefings for policymakers. We want to do
Around the state?
We will do around the state. We'll go and meet with the media. We'll go and meet with local chambers of commerce and talk about this. The other thing is that we're going to do a set like this around the healthcare issue, so there'll be both of those packages. And I guess the last thing I would say is we're going to try to produce a pretty robust website or digital platform on the internet so that you can go and read the report, but click on segments of the report and go to cuts from this set of conversations so that it becomes a more interactive sort of process.
64,000 jobs in food processing and manufacturing in Wisconsin. That's one stat. At least $8 billion, part of Wisconsin's economy. That's why this is important. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.